Cool. All right, so this is a space for teachers and any other staff that will be teaching, and it's called Creative Writing and Student Voice. And even though the Zoom call is for 1 hour, my hope is just kind of run through my topics, give out some examples, kind of give a preview to some content that you could consider using in your classes or in your sites. And then from there, just kind of ask questions, okay? So moving on here, you got the record button. And I'll start off here with the poem written by a current student that she wrote in my class for trimester 3. And in this class, it was like a poetic study class by using this book called The Poetics, which I've talked about so many times. And The Poetics is a book written in journal entries, but in the form of poetry. And what I like about the book is it for me, it reinforces my thinking of what I know about poetry. For a lot of people, is that it's scary. A lot of students really don't have a feel for that, or they really don't have much interest, because a lot of poetry that they probably have seen before has been very like guesswork and very maybe image heavy, and not knowing how to like interpret some of the images. And sometimes some poems are just like really not clear in their messaging. So I kind of want to start off with this poem by my student. And this is what's called an where I'm from poem. And I'll talk about this later. And so in this poem, the task was to have students write these poems about where they're from. And specifically, they're talking about like their cities. And again, I'll go more in depth about this later. So here it is, Shakira Lameli and her poem, Where I'm From. I am from Compton, and from gunshots and ambulance silence, from heavy smokers and heavy drinkers. In this house, we don't eat at the table. We go to our rooms, 3 sisters and 2 brothers. Older sister is resting with angels in peace. My mom is my dad. Where I'm from, we have daily chores. Better have this house clean by 5:30. Takeovers is what I hear. Allowed to get tattoos at 15. Little sister, little brother, always fighting. Mom is always working and hardly home. Food is mostly cooked by me. Mom works in a Salvador restaurant. Parents are from Jalisco, where I'm from. Graffiti is everywhere. And the reason why I chose to begin this call on this topic with this poem, because it's a pretty good example that shows how students can use their very own lives, their backgrounds, their situations as content that serves as the vehicle for their ideas when they're being asked to produce writing like this. And so this Where I'm From poem exercise is really that, using details about the home, about the environment, the streets, neighborhood, and use those details to provide the setting and understanding for the reader, so that by using the imagery of objects and places, it serves to build the poet's identity on the page. So I thought this would be a great way to have an idea of how you can do this in your classroom, whether you teach English, whether you teach history, government, like, how can creative writing be used to tap into that space of ideas that we have, but also the voice that we carry with us every day. Okay. So the goal for today is for me to talk about the student journal that we put out that is called In Our Own Words. Yeah, you got a question, Jesse? What's up?
Yeah, I just had an idea or just a question for you. Like, since you now are you have volume 3 already published, has the thought come to mind where you would use, let's say, in our own voices to teach an English class? So like exclusively using the text that students actually did as the basis in the background of the course. Because I'm just thinking right now, like that poem, like I know I've tried to have students do it where I'm from poem, or I've introduced them for something like that too. But also, like starting off the class with like, here's the student work. We're actually going to look at all student work throughout this course, or maybe it's not. Maybe you don't do a whole course on it, but you do a study. I don't know. That's just an idea of using word as the the text for the course.
Yeah, Joey, that's a great idea and suggestion. And the answer is not exactly yes, but but the hope at some point is that the anthology that could be the next anthology comes with it review questions for students to answer, which requires someone to go through the content and kind of like think of these questions so that it becomes an actual book that can be used to discuss in class, to analyze, and to write about. There's more to that of a response that I may not have time to really go more in depth, but the answer is like it's a great thing to do. What's been done for me is really kind of using samples of past published writers to help students see how these folks wrote their poems. But absolutely, if there comes a point in time where a teacher wants to like adopt an anthology of this kind and do like a 1 week unit, 2 weeks, or a whole month study, that's fantastic. But the actual thing is to be able to provide with it like a curriculum or review questions so that anybody can just really adopt and manage to their liking. So yeah, that's a hope. And the greater hope too, Jesse, is that it's not just something that teachers from our network adopt this kind of book and teach it, but that other schools in California, other schools in the US actually use this book to teach the themes that we ask our students to learn about in our classes. Only difference is, the larger audience that decides what gets published versus the smaller audience that is trying to get that same representation. I'll talk about in a few moments, but yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Something that is for sure consideration. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, cool. So going back, I'll talk about the publication. We'll sample some youth poetry, and then talk about how you can bring creative writing in your space. It sounds like Jesse has already tried like an I am where I'm from poem exercise, but there's other things you can do also with your students. I'll share some resources. And then in case you're interested, like I know the journal is meant to showcase YouthBuilds that we have with YCSC, but maybe you want to do your own classrooms publication of your students' work, of whatever that looks like. And I'll talk about that as well. So quick check here. In my brain, I'm thinking there's about 20 people on the call, but maybe I'll get 5 more later. But it'd be helpful for me to know what is your experience or level of exposure to creative writing. So I'm just kind of curious, like for Jesse, for Drew, and anybody else that views this recording afterwards, is like, what's your level of experience with creative writing or exposure? So in other words, do you write poems yourself? Are you yourself a writer as a hobby, as a side job? Like what's your exposure and level of expertise or experience? So I got the 1, 2, 3, 1. You can put in on the chat or just say out loud 1. If you don't do any kind of writing at all, that's not being asked of you to do. So if you're the kind of person that says, hey, if I have to write an email, I'll write the email. If I have to write an essay for a class, I'll do it. But beyond that, I don't write. Maybe you're a 1 or you're a 2. You probably dabble with some ideas with words, some images. Maybe you have some poems, tinker with it a couple of times, but it's not something you really devote to it as closely. Or if you're number 3, you always have a journal with you. You're the one that really devotes daily writing time or weekly writing time, or you're part of some writers group in your community where you know with your friends. So are you a 1, a 2, or a 3? For myself, it kind of changes, to be honest. For me, I think right now I'm more in a number 2, mainly because my time is really just devoted to other things I got to do for my job. And then when I go home, I don't have as much time like I used to before having kids. But at one point I was a 3. Like I was like a religious 3 kind of person and just really focusing on the craft, you know. Um, and then there might come a point where I might become a 1 at some point where I might just not have any kind of time at all, and my attention might just then will focus on other things here. So Jesse says 1. He's like, I don't write if I don't gotta write it. Cool, man. Drew,
I'd
where do you
say
see yourself?
I'd say I'm like a 2, maybe a 3 if you count like the notes app on your phone, right? Like I'll always jot down things here and there on it, but yeah,
Yeah,
like you said, just because of time constraints, we'll see.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And the
Okay,
good
then
thing
I'll
about
rephrase mine to 2 as well, because I do actually write down notes when one's a little too extreme. Yeah, based on Drew's example, I guess I'm a 2 as well, because I have tons of notes on my phone.
yeah. And the question is like why? Like why do you even take these notes? You might want to say, well, it's to remember what I'm thinking about. It's to remember what's happening at the moment. But it's also to record the moment of time of which you have this idea, right? You're recording this moment to really kind of almost like archive that on this day at this time, you may note of something, right? If you extend that idea to published writers, it's something similar where they're archiving these ideas. They're just packaged and fashioned and presented as fiction, nonfiction, poems, creative essays. But it's an act of really recording these ideas or these events, right? Um, and that's cool. And if people are 1, that's fine too. I mean, I meet a lot of people that just like, if they don't got to write something, they're not going to just write it for the heck of it, and that's fine. So our guiding questions for the call today that we'll hopefully try to, in some kind of way, address is the following. How can I integrate creative writing into my classroom or my site? So maybe if not for your classroom, is this something you want to introduce to your site partners if you haven't done so already? Is it something you want to probably integrate for mental toughness? How do I know if students enjoy writing creatively? And the reason that question is there because I've discovered that students are kind of like not into the idea, but once they're given a chance to play with language, they kind of like the writing, and any kind of like animosity towards writing kind of changes. But sometimes you don't know that right off the bat. You have to just try ideas out. What is a student journal and what is its purpose? Why should I introduce creative writing to my students? And how can writing poems or stories help build a community of empathy and understanding? So here's the part where I'm trying to take like all this into a concise lesson that hopefully helps to segue into the why for having these kinds of journals, whether it's a charter school thing, or if you decide it becomes a classroom project for an EPT, there's a purpose for that. So this I found in a very almost like, oh, this had to happen. The day before I present is this quote by a writer named Dagoberto Gil, who is a Chicano writer. And he was quoting the New Yorker, and I don't know which article he took this from, but it came out this year. And this whole, argument out there is representation that is in the books. In other words, who gets published? How often do these writers get published? And also, like when these books are being read, what is the content? What kind of topics? What people are being reflected in the pages? So here it says a pattern of ruthless streamlining seems especially troubling in an ecosystem long marked by glaring whiteness. A 2020 joint study conducted by Lee and Lowe Books and Boston University revealed that 76% of publishing employees identify as white. All of the CEOs who testified at the Perryman Federal Courthouse last week are white. Not coincidentally, the New York Times has determined that in 2018, out of more than 3,000 widely read authors, 95% are white. These numbers speak to a broader homogeneity in the literary landscape. Despite their aura of idealistic adventure, publishing executives have shown themselves to be fiercely risk adverse. In a capricious market, they've leaned 100-year-old inventory instead of nourishing the books that might become tomorrow's backlist. They've touted proven formulae, marquee names, and their imitators at the expense of experimental talents. So what this really means is, if you were to research, look up authors, you'll understand that for the most part, it's an industry driven by the people who have the power to decide what gets printed and what does not get printed. Books have been around for a long time, right? They're not just something that we just have for the past 50 years. Books have been being published since the printing press has been created to help spread the ideas of the words. But looking back, you might probably see that a typical market is put out there that features writers that may not be entirely diverse. And so what happens now, what's been happening for the past probably 20 years or so is, not just like a call to action to say, hey, you know what? I mean, these publications about Nathaniel Hawthorne and so forth are great, and they probably help to define the literary canon. But we have a lot of other voices out there that we don't know about. They should be seen and heard in print. And so, what you have now is publications, companies out there trying to change the landscape of publication so that these books that get put out there feature more people of color, and especially the kind of stories that represent the people that really are the fabric of American society. So here is some journals that that's their job, right? The Colorado Review comes out from Colorado State. I believe it comes out 4 times a year. They publish new fiction, new poetry, new essays, photography, and it's the academic market that this journal, along with Gulf Coast, along with I'm blanking on journals. They kind of drive the force into what's fresh and new in publication. So anytime you have like a new writer out there, it probably came from a journal of this kind of stepping stone that helps establish a writer's career. Huisache is the journal from Dagoberto Gil, the guy whose quote I took from, in which he's trying to counter-argue the voices that have already been published many, many times, and they seem to replicate similar themes and topics, and say, you know what? We have other voices in the minority that really have something to say about life. And so Huisache, along with other publications, are trying to do that. The New Yorker, probably heard of it, has been around for a long time, but it's also the driving force for what's considered literary and what helps to establish these voices in the publishing industry. And so the approach that we have as a charter school is along the veins of that, of publishing the voices of our students, because they have voices, they have ideas, they have experiences, they have imagination, they have creativity. And so the journals that have been coming out from the English department, but also from YCSE, is really trying to, provide that space so that students can be heard, along with their reputable writers out there who have been publishing for quite some time already. And so really the idea is that we have opportunities to offer to students so that, we can probably assign the 5-paragraph essay, and there's nothing wrong with that, but also allowing them to see that writing is also can be playful and creative. And so really the journal is meant to help provide that space and invite students to be part of the large conversation in the literary landscape about what it means to be me, what it means to be my own individuality from my own community, and to share those stories with others so that we have a more complex understanding about really what makes America diverse. And so the publications here that have come out have been In Our Own Words, that started back in 2016, I believe. And just kind of like work with teachers who were, available and interested in doing such a project, just kind of going to the classrooms and say, hey guys, let's write some poetry, let's write some stories, with the hope and the intent that what they collected from their classes became the material for the publication. Volume 2, the same idea, getting work out there from students. And in the 3rd volume that came out just about a month ago is the latest iteration of that movement of student writing. And really, it's just it's a way to just put their voices on a page. To quickly share my background, I recall high school, reading Red Badge of Courage and reading Steinbeck and Virginia Woolf. And then I thought, cool, this is literature, right? And somehow in my brain, I thought, yeah, I think being a writer sounds pretty cool, right? And so basically, I'm reading these novels, from writers with European backgrounds, and me thinking, oh, that's how literature is. It's got to be, written a certain way. It's got to sound a certain way. Maybe some Victorian elements going on. And then I had a teacher who took over AP English in my senior year, and he's like, we're changing this. And then he brought Chicano writers. And I thought, what? That's insane. We can't be doing that. We got to be reading Jane Eyre, man. We can't read this stuff from Sandra Cisneros. We may get in trouble. But I understood, of course, afterwards that he was helping us to understand that, writers can be of people of various colors and backgrounds and experiences and accents and languages. And so when I discovered that there was a Sandra Cisneros and what she wrote really strongly resonated with me, I thought, wow, why was I not told that she existed? Who's been keeping the secret? And so I think about that time in my life and thinking about how it's providing that identity for our students on the page, that it helps to cement the narrative voices. And so I feel like that's really like my approach to this is really like we have students who are writers or they like to dabble with language, and those who they may not be into it at first, but to give it a try and they realize, hey, I think I like this thing called writing. And so the why for the journal, whether it's something you do at your classroom or is something we do as a charter school, is again, opportunities that we want to give. That's not just standard, basic, formalized writing, but that students can see that you can kind of tinker with ideas with your writing. It's okay to invent events in your fiction story that might be based on true events. Creative writing just teaches them to take risks and to not be afraid of language, and to kind of see language as an artistic way of expression. Poems, stories that we ask them to produce are extensions of their voice and identity. It helps to build confidence in their expression, but it also can serve as a gateway for a lot of our students to kind of understand how language works. In other words, sometimes by them learning how to be better at English, if they're learning that by just writing your formal analytical essay with your topic sentence and concluding sentence, like if they think that's how it is, they may not recognize there's another approach to learning language, and that might help them to better relate. It helps teach genre, it helps teach audience, and it can help build empathy with each other and with the world. And overall, when we ask them to write, their life experiences, where they come from, serves as fodder and inspiration for what they write. Okay. Questions so far at this point? All right, so then here is me just kind of walking through what I have as ways that you can integrate creative writing in your space. And I have the word blurb because hopefully I have time to show you that website. But for now, let me just kind of click here. And then know that this folder has been put together for this call that is available to you. So how can I use poetry writing, for example, in my classroom, in my space, in my site? If, for example, you're looking to have an activity for mental toughness, maybe you're doing something where in mental toughness, you want to build some sense of culture, right? Maybe it's the first day or the third day and your students are still kind of like in your honeymoon stage, not really misbehaving that much just yet, but maybe want to set the tone in some kind of way. The most popular poetry writing exercise that a lot of folks use is the I am poem, which is probably something you might have used before. The I am poem is basically, again, I am. And in this kind of poem, students provide the fill-ins for the template. So I am Mario Rosado. I am kind, or I am kind and compassionate. And they kind of run down, they go through this template and provide the responses, maybe on a sheet of paper, or if you want to go full like tech, they might just type it up. And then they have a poem. And what's great about that is, one, if you have someone that's never, ever, ever even looked at a poem, this could be daunting. But having a template which shows them what goes where can help them just really ease any possible anxiety. And for the people that have a knack for poetry, it might be a breeze for them, which is fantastic. And probably what they choose, like particular word language or word choice, can help other developing writers kind of see that as models for language expression. So the I am poem is probably, again, one of the most sought out poem activities that a lot of teachers use. Where I'm from, that was a poem I read earlier, which, there was another poem I didn't see anyway, is another one that you can use, which comes from this chapter excerpt from Rethinking Schools. And the book is Rhythm and Resistance, which we didn't have available at PD because of the shipment didn't come in. But if you guys come on tomorrow, we'll have a few copies available for those who want it. Where I'm from, again, is a way to invite students in the classroom. Could be something you do for your first week of classes or mental toughness, again, to kind of create that baseline of understanding of each other. And, the article, think about, well, it says 9 pages. It's a quick read, but it provides the rationale for why. Okay, sounds good. It provides a rationale for the why, and then as well as examples from other people who produce the same kinds of poems. So what I did is, I kind of used this example of where I'm from, and I also created a graphic organizer that helps them to help brainstorm ideas for creating their poem, which don't see it here, but I know it's somewhere. But it's a great way to use that to get students' feet wet, so to speak. Cool. All right. From there, other templates I have here. Let's say you kind of want to do a little more than that. This is not the best example. You do have to kind of tilt your head, but I have these templates that you can also offer to students that, again, is a low stakes approach to writing poetry and is really a way to have them, fill in the blanks. But at the end, they have a poem they call their own. This one that's called I Just Thought You Should Know is a letter-based poem that students are being asked to write to someone that they know, someone they want to communicate, mom, dad, stepsister, alive, dead. And here the refrain or the repeating lines are, I just thought you should know. And then what the student will do is, pretty much copy that and then fill the blanks in to have the complete poem. There's that. There's also the lessons of courage and fear for them to use. And home to me is pretty cool because it describes the home by using concrete details, similar kind of a bit to where I'm from, but it's really more specific about what's in the house. And so you learn about the poet based on those kinds of objects and details. And we have this template that you can use for students and maybe have them like identify like concrete details, like what are some objects you see in this poem? Like, oh, I see soup, I see dishes, but also helping them see like, well, be descriptive, like what kind of soup, what kind of dishes, do we have sounds associated? And eventually, once they're kind of, ready, they kind of move on to producing their own poem with the help of a template. For me, my experience is whenever I introduce like poetry writing, I feel like templates is like my first approach because I don't always know where people are with their writing. But eventually you can then move on to something a little more challenging. And probably one of those could be personification poem, in which personification poem is a poem that is written in the point of view of an object. So in this case, this student wrote a personification poem from the point of view of music. And then with that, I have resources that allow students to kind of like understand what that really means. So there's like a handout to help them like identify the object that's being personified. And when they're ready, they can write the poem from the point of view of their phone, from the point of view of their PS5, from the point of view of their half-eaten sandwich in the refrigerator, right? And if you go to this kind of level, you're asking them to be more creative with their thinking, but that's something you might want to consider when you feel you're ready. If you feel like your class is ready for that right off the bat, that's great. But if you want to have like a kind of like a linear approach, maybe the templates to start off and kind of gauge where they're at, and then from there they move on to the more challenging forms of writing poetry. And not just poetry, there's also units on vignettes. So here we have a resource, I just kind of put it in there, that uses the House of Mango Street, which is kind of like a novella made up of vignettes, which are short stories about a girl in Chicago who pretty much is trying to describe her upbringing in this house with her brothers and her parents. And in this unit, students are reading House of Mango Street, which is also included in the folder. You have a PDF version, but also it allows them to analyze the vignette format to enable them to produce their own collection of vignettes as well. Okay, a lot of stuff here really for the picking, for selecting. We may not use everything, but again, for me, my suggestion is, if it's something you do in the classroom to start off your first week, that's great. I am poems do the trick. If you're going to be offering an English class, maybe you want to use the poetry unit that's here that kind of gives you the lessons that you decide if it's a lesson that requires 2 days, 3 days, 1 day. But in this poetry unit curricular planner, it helps students to practice writing poetry from free verse to couplets to tercets, and I believe into sonnets, which is a little more harder to write. It's available here, and in this kind of planner, you have the objective of what they got to be doing, the resources, which should be in the same folder, and other helpful links like videos and whatnot to help provide further context for students. Again, if you're like not sure about mental toughness, I am poems could do the trick. Aside from that, here's another one on odes. So ode is like a dedication to something kind of poem. And in this one, students can have fun by having an ode to an iPad, an iPod, or iPhone, or ode to sleep, and they kind of provide like this, it's like their gratitude towards something, which could be like a silly way of writing poetry. Um, and for the most part, the journals that has been put out by YCSC, for the most part, have been heavily on poetry, mainly because it's faster to produce. When it comes to writing longer narratives or vignettes, it requires more time, which really depends on the comfort level and experience of the teacher. But really, I mean, as long as your students are doing something that is creative with words, I mean, let them have fun with that. Then comes the question of what you do with that. Do you just say, great, A plus, congrats, or does the writing go somewhere? This is where you kind of decide if you want this to be part of volume number 4, which is still like up in the air. To be honest, that's an option. But let's say you want to do some kind of APT where you do compile a book together and you ask them to produce something creative of a creative writing of an assignment. Maybe that's what you do. If that's the case, then you go to the website that I use, which is Blurb, and Blurb looks like this. It's like a lot of websites out there that is DIY for creating picture books and lots of different books as well. And this is what I've been using to create the journals that we put out. Okay, palm trees. I got to go through this security check. Did I get it right? Hopefully. Anyway. And what it is if you decide to say, okay, you know what, that's going to be your classroom anthology, and you're going to call it English 9 something, or it's something that's history related, really up to you. Then you want to go to the website here. You have to download what's called Bookright. Bookright is the actual software that Blurb uses to enable you to print whatever content you put together. And so here, once I click on create, after I download Bookright, then I have to select the kind of book I want to use to make the book happen. It's really up to you. I try to go with the most affordable, frugal option so that I know that it gets approved by YCSC, because I do try to provide copies for everybody. But you just kind of go through the options here, right? So let's say, I'm not seeing the whole window here. So let's say I want to make a book, and Pro Design might be some better options. You have small square, center landscape, and center portrait and whatnot. Probably trade book will be the cheapest option, which is a 5x8 size book, which would be this one. And these cost $2.99 per print, up to 24 pages. So let's say you do want to do like a final project, APT about this. Great. You have 10 students. They write some sonnets about how World War II ended. Like, you can decide if you put a poetic spin to your APTs, and they say, cool, let's put it together in the book. Then you might want to select the cheaper option, because then of course that won't cost a lot for the charter school to then pay for. And then from there, once you select it, you kind of choose your paper, soft cover probably, and then you give it a title. And at some point you should have this, which is pretty much the actual design layout for you to then put there all the poetry or stories you want to put together. I only share this in the event that might interest you as a class project, as a final APT, but if that's not on your menu, that's okay, but just know that it is an option as a site-based decision. If not, if people out there are into the idea of collecting student poetry or stories, then that's great. there could be a volume 4. We'll assemble some teachers who might be into the idea of putting a book together, and then we can have volume 4 come out sometime maybe by next spring. So I might have spoken really fast. I try to go through all the information, but do you have any questions?
That's great. Thanks a lot for pointing out some of the stuff in the folder there that I wouldn't have noticed otherwise. There's so much good stuff in there, so I appreciate that. I have a contribution. I did a unit on Slaughterhouse 5, that novel for summer school, and I have PDFs of the book chapter by chapter. Can I send that to you so you can put it on there? I know there's like a shared novel folder in there somewhere.
Absolutely, just send it my way, and it's always good to keep adding more content to the folder itself. But yeah, just send it away, and the slideshow here will be available. I think I'll email it probably, but it will also be available in the folder itself that I created. But basically, yeah, it takes you to some resources to get started. But yeah, whatever you have, Drew, just send it my way, and I can for sure add that to our folder.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I gotta log on to a COVID testing training webinar now, but it's
Gotcha.
great to check out with you, and yeah, hopefully we can talk again soon.
Yeah, man. Thanks for coming by, and thanks for the questions. See you soon.
No problem. Peace.